Welcome back. The Wild Robot Escapes, Chapter 31 to 36. Chapter 31, The Campfire. Wood smoke billowed up from the backyard and drifted across the farm. Roz was building a campfire for the Sharifs. In her old life, the robot made fire by cracking special stones together until she got a spark. In her new life, she used a lighter. The family sat around the rippling flames and gazed up at the stars, and the dog stretched out on the warm ground. The robot was standing nearby, but her thoughts were far away. Her computer brain was scrolling back through the memories of campfires and of stargazing with Bright Bill. Fluffy white marshmallows were skewered onto the ends of sticks and then roasted above the flames. The children laughed at their marshmallows as they caught fire. They liked them charred on the outside and gooey on the inside. Their father prepared his evenly browned. When the Sharifs weren't stuffing their mouths, they were chattering happily. "That's the space station," said Jaya, pointing to the tiny dot that slowly moved through the sky. "I can't believe that people live there." "Animals live there too," said Jade. "The station has a farm. We should bring our cows up and show those space farmers how it's done." "I think our cows are perfectly content right here on Earth," said Mr. Sharif, "and so am I." Once the marshmallows were gone, Jay and Jade snuggled up with Oscar and stared into the flames and asked their father about the old days. But the children were just too cozy to stay awake for long, so Mr. Sharif spoke to Roz instead. "We made campfires all the time when I was a boy." The man poked the coals with his marshmallow stick, and the glowing embers floated into the air. The whole family would sit around like this, and we would tell stories. We had a nice life here. But then my brother and sister moved to the city. My parents got old, and everyone expected me to take over the farm. "I couldn't run this place by myself," he went on, "so I hired Jamila. I did the farm work, and she managed the business. We made a good team. And then we fell in love. When Jamila was pregnant with Jade, we bought a few auto machines to help out. Then Jaya showed up, and we bought a few more. Then, if I'd known one of those machines would be the death of her." The farmer's voice trailed off. Roz wanted to know more about Jamila, and about Mr. Sharif, and about the rest of his family. But a normal robot wouldn't ask those personal questions, so she kept her questions all to herself, and she dropped another log on the fire. Chapter 32, The Old Barn. Long ago, Hilltop Farm was a very different place. The original farmers grew vegetable gardens and fruit orchards, and they raised chickens and sheep and goats. The farm had changed a lot since then, but there were still signs of its past. Low stone walls lined some of the fields. A rusty tractor sat in the weeds. Hidden within densely wooded grove was the old barn. The barn hadn't been used in generations. Over the years, though, the trees had quietly grown up around it, and moss had spread across its roof. But the barn was still strong and solid, and Roz wanted to take a look inside. The big barn door screeched open on its rails. "Hello," said the robot, peering into the darkness. "Is anyone here?" A mouse squeaked and scurried out of sight, and then Roz had the barn to herself. She stepped through the doorway and she switched on her headlights. The vast interior was crisscrossed with thick wooden beams. Stairways and ramps led up to lofts and platforms. Lanterns hung from hooks on the walls. Old-fashioned farm equipment lay here and there. The barn still had a faint smell of farm animals, and even though none had lived there for ages. A large trunk sat on a wood table, covered in dust. Roz carefully opened the lid and examined its contents. A collection of farming magazines, a pair of leather gloves, and a pencil nub. Then she noticed a small journal. The name Cyrus Sharif was elegantly scrawled across its cover. The pages were filled with his handwritten notes and the hand-drawn diagrams about raising livestock, growing crops, and building barns, about working with the land that helped with the help of strong animals and simple machines. Cyrus Sharif had just jotted down his thoughts about the long history of farming. He believed that the modern world owed its entire existence to ancient farms. When early humans first started growing food, those farms were small and primitive, but they supported an entire village, which became a town, which became a city. The writings were so wise and insightful that Roz read the journal from cover to cover. By the end, she almost felt as if she knew Cyrus Sharif, whoever he was. The journal was a treasure. She tucked it into the pocket of her tool belt for safekeeping. Chapter 33. The Autumn. Autumn colors were sweeping across the farm country. The lush greens of summer faded into reds and browns. Crops were harvested, leaves fell away, and the landscape turned stark and gray. On Hilltop Farm, the cows were grazing on what remained of the pasture grass, while the herding machine hovered nearby. The field machine was preparing the fields for winter. The drones circled the farm several times a day, but there was less to report in the autumn. Although Jaya and Jade were busy with school, they always made time for Roz. The children never grew tired of listening to the robot stories, and they never grew tired of sharing their own. The bees and the mice, and the deer and the frogs, and the raccoons and the squirrels and the snakes were all getting ready for the cold winter. So, too, were the birds. The owls spruced up their nests, the crows stockpiled acorns, the swallows were swooping until they were over the farmland, but they would soon be leaving for the winter. And any day now, other migratory birds would begin to pass through their long journeys to the south. Chapter 34. The Delighted Geese. A flock of geese had just landed at Hilltop Farm. It was the first flock of the autumn migration. The geese floated on the pond, cleaning their feathers and nibbling on weeds. But they all stopped doing what they were doing when Roz stopped and waved and said hello. The robot never forgot a face. She was certain she didn't know any of these geese. But then, they seemed to know her. Even before she introduced herself, the lead goose squawked, "Is your name Roz?" The robot stared at the goose. "Well, yes it is. And can you speak the animal language?" The answer was obvious, but Roz politely said, "Yes, I can speak the animal language." "Do you, by any chance, have a goose for a son?" "Yes, I do," said Roz. "His name is Brightbill." And at that a voice blurted out, "The stories are true!" And suddenly the flock was smiling, fluttering over to the robot. When the commotion settled down, the leader explained, "All along our migration, we've heard stories of a robot who could speak to animals, who has a goose for a son, and who is trapped on a farm. That sounded ridiculous to us, but here you are." The flock was absolutely delighted to meet with our robot. They lounged around the pond for a couple of days, chatting with Roz whenever she came by, and then they continued flying south on their way to their wintering grounds. Another flock of geese arrived. The same thing happened over again. Roz welcomed them. They were delighted to meet the legendary robot. And then the flock continued south. Then it happened again, and again. And before long, the coming and going of the delighted geese was just another part of the robot's autumn routine. Straggling behind the others, as usual, was Wingtip's flock. When Roz saw them splashing into the pond, she felt something like hope that they might have news of her son. But sadly, the geese had no news. And as the flock took off and left Roz behind, she began to question if she would ever see Brightbill again. Chapter 35. The Memories. Roz still dreamed of escaping and of going home, of reuniting with her son. But her dreams were starting to feel impossible. She was losing hope. Was it time for the robot to accept her new life and forget her old one? Forget. Roz was troubled by that word. You see, her computer brain remembered every detail of her life on the island, and it hurt to think that she might never make it back there. However, the robot could always forget. She could erase her old memories. It would be like they never happened. The heaviness of how she felt would vanish. But without her memories, who would she be? No, Roz wanted to remember her old life, which was good, because someone from her old life was about to appear. Chapter 36, The Unusual Flock. Another flock of geese was approaching the farm, but this flock was unusual. It wasn't flying south like the others. It was flying north in a perfect V formation. It was led by a young, graceful goose. The flock flew once around the farm buildings, then delicately touched down at the barnyard. The leader whispered some words to the others, and then he fluttered in through the barn door. The cows looked up from their stalls as the goose perched himself on a railing near the middle of the barn, and then the goose cleared his throat, shook his tail feathers, and announced to the herd, "I am looking for a robot named Roz. My name is Brightbill. I am her son." The reunion. Something was wrong with the cows. Their excited moos echoed from the farm and across the barn. Roz sent the milk truck away for its evening deliveries and hurried off to see what the ruckus was. When she stepped into the barn, she found the entire herd together. As the robot started pushing her way through, the cows turned to her and smiled. And then Roz saw him, her beloved son, Brightbill. As you know, reader, robots don't feel emotions, not the way that animals do. But in that moment, in that barn, nobody had any doubt how Roz felt. She rushed forward and she scooped up her son in her arms. "Brightbill," she said, "is that really you?" "It is really me." Brightbill nuzzled his mother's face. "How did you find me?" said Roz. "Ma, you're famous." You were all anyone could talk about in the wintering grounds. It started with the flocks of geese that stopped here on their migrations. They shared your story with everyone they met. Your story spread from flock to flock, from north to south, from east to west, and eventually your story made its way to me. I took off as soon as I heard you were here. I didn't even tell the others, but we caught up with him. Loudwing, the old goose, fluttered over the herd and gently landed on a cow's back. Brightbill wasn't the only one who wanted to see you again, Roz. The rest of the flock appeared, and the robot found herself surrounded by old friends and family. Squawking and mooing and laughing and cheering filled the barn. And then came a loud, clear voice that only the robot understood. "Roz, what are you doing?" The animals hushed. Roz slowly turned around, and there was Jaya and Jade standing in the doorway. The children had seen everything.